Our passion is to become the trusted advisor for our clients and impact their success through education, process, and technology. For me, the most exciting part of what we do is being able to impact our clients' success. Hello, my name is Kayvan Yazdi. I'm the CEO and co-founder at TruAdvantage. We are an MSP and MSSP here in Cupertino, California, right in front of Apple campus, or as we call it, the Bay Area. One of the main marketing slogans that we use, which is actually embedded through our process, is solve, secure, optimize, and grow. When we can help out our clients on a daily basis to solve their problems and being able to, for example, with our medical clients, take care of the patient care, which is the most important thing, for us, that brings a lot of satisfaction. Security is, of course, that peace of mind and data protection that we do for our clients. But the most important part for us is being able to optimize their operations on a regular basis. If you do something in 10 minutes and I can make this be done in 5 minutes, that's the most satisfying thing for us to do. That's how we can create a competitive advantage for our clients. For example, making our clients more scalable, from automating your onboarding process to minimizing or making your environment as lean as possible so it's easy to manage.
Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. Today we're going to speak a little bit about disaster recovery readiness. A couple of the things we'll touch on is really about the goal to understand the impacts of disaster on organizations like yours, and to provide you with really the tools and the methodologies that you'll need to prepare and protect your business from the data loss threat. So I'm your host, Kirsten Vogelsang, and I'm joined today by Kyle Marsan. He's Senior Systems Engineer at Barracuda. We'll hand over the reins in just a moment, but before I do, I'd like to share a few housekeeping items. We want to keep this fun and engaging, so we'll have a few polls throughout that you can respond to, and you'll have an opportunity to get entered into a raffle to win some swag for each poll that you participate in. Should you participate and stay through till the end, there'll be another raffle for some more swag. So stay tuned till the end. You'll not only get some great information, but get some opportunities to win some fun stuff. And don't forget to put your questions in the Q&A box on your screen, and we'll get to them either at the end of the presentation, or if it's relevant for while we're going through, we'll try to answer them throughout. So without further ado, I will pass it over to Kyle to do a little intro of himself and get into an intro of Barracuda.
Awesome. Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. My name is Kyle Marsan. I am a Senior Systems Engineer with Barracuda. Personally, I specialize in the email and disaster recovery side of the house. So today we're going to be focusing on disaster recovery. But before we jump into it, just a little bit about Barracuda for anyone who may not be familiar. As a company, we collaborate very closely with managed service providers to help supply innovative cybersecurity products. Our goal is to try to make everything easy to buy, easy to deploy, easy to use, right? We don't want to make anything so complex that it's unusable. We have 1,900 full-time employees whose sole job is to help protect our customers for life. Within the Barracuda family, we have a lot of MSP-focused security solutions. So I mentioned personally, I deal with a lot of our email security and data protection. We also offer network and cloud application security. And one of the newest components to our portfolio is our managed XDR. So for anyone who isn't aware of that acronym, I know there's a lot of them in the tech space. That stands for Extended Detection and Response. So really, that's part of our 24/7, 365 security operations center. So what that means to small and mid-sized organizations really is that we have a team of cybersecurity experts that are monitoring your network from a single pane of glass so that attacks can be prevented. And in the case of some sort of breach, the response time to a cyber attack is really reduced to minimal downtime. And downtime is something that we'll talk a little bit throughout this presentation. Obviously, we're here to say nice things about Barracuda ourselves, but it means a lot more when there's other outside organizations that have nice things to say as well. So just on the right-hand side of this slide here is just a handful of the different journals and stuff like that in the industry that have awarded some awards to Barracuda. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I know it's a little bit cliche, but data really truly is the lifeblood of every business, which really makes it crucial to back up and secure despite any type of disaster that you might encounter. Now, so more than ever, there's a growing amount of data to protect, such as things like your financial records, employee payroll information, obviously your customer data, patient info, right? Whatever you may deal with on a daily basis, we need to make sure that that's secure, online, so that you guys are able to run your business. And when we talk about threats, and we will be talking about threats, those come in all sorts of different forms. They range from things like simple, equipment failure, hard drive issues, server dies, to fire on site. We run into theft, whether it's physical theft or some sort of, social engineering type theft of data access, controls, those kinds of things. And then everyone's familiar with viruses. So it's important to protect your data and to really have a plan for recovery in place in case one of these threats pops up. Each of these different threats comes with their own response plan, but every single one of these has a cost associated with it. So the rate at which cyber attacks against small businesses grew last year is actually staggering. So the number is 424%, and that's just in the scope of small to mid-sized businesses. So really, this means that small business cyber breaches grew more than 5 times in the past 12 months when compared to the previous year. So really, it seems that these cyber criminals are actively out there targeting small businesses. And when I talk to a lot of these small businesses, right, they assume that the cyber criminals would be targeting larger businesses. The idea is they have more customer data, more valuable data, right? Revenues are greater, which means there's bigger potential for a higher payout, which is all true, but they also tend to have dedicated security teams and the most sophisticated tools and everything like that in place. So unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case that they're targeting larger companies. They're actually putting more of their focus and effort into smaller companies. The criminals tend to be a little bit lazy, and they prefer to go after what they would consider quicker, easier payouts than spend months and months trying to land the whale, right? So every attack has a cost associated with it. When we think of recovering from attacks, it's usually the monetary value, which is certainly a thing, right? For example, paying to recover from ransomware. But there's a lot of sort of intangible costs that go into these attacks as well. So one of those includes downtime. So of course, there's the financial impact. One study by Statista estimated that the average cost of downtime for a business is somewhere between $8,000 and just under $26,000 per hour. But there's also the brand impact, right? So this isn't directly tied to monetary cost, but there's a long-term impact to your business. So in the fast-paced business landscape, customers expect a quick, seamless experience every time they try to interact with you. So any sort of delays due to downtime really is just, potentially intolerable or unacceptable. So a single downtime event can really put your organization's reliability and reputation at risk. If there's any kind of repeated downtime events, this really results in unhappy customers, and that'll quickly translate into things like bad customer reviews, tarnished brand image, and ultimately, potential customers being hesitant to do business with you moving forward. And then there's sort of the more obvious one. There's the data loss aspect. So downtime affects not only your business, but your clients as well. Downtime due to things like cyber attacks or server or network outage that can result in corrupt damage or stolen data. Really have an effect, and unexpected downtime, like a server outage, for example, can potentially expose your valuable data and create security gaps, which cyber criminals are more than happy to try to exploit to gain unauthorized access to the environment. Not all businesses are affected equally to these different disasters and downtime, though, with some industries being much more high risk to loss and downtime than others. So things like financial services, for example, or a really good one is healthcare organizations. They have an extremely high cost associated with downtime and have a very high need to restore systems as quickly as possible. Manufacturing is another one, right? They're particularly affected by disruption of the business operations, where any sort of downtime literally means a stop of production completely, which has, obviously staggering effects to the business itself. So let's go ahead and I'll hand it over to Kirsten again for a quick poll.
Okay, and don't forget, if you participate, we'll enter you into a raffle to win some swag. So I'm going to launch one on the screen, but in the meantime, I'll ask the question, do you have an incident response plan in case of a breach? So I'll launch that on the screen now, and feel free to participate. I'll share it out, but it's anonymous when I share. So feel free to be as candid as possible. We've done this webinar a few times before, in terms of the topic of disaster recovery. And, I can tell you that right now we're actually doing, quite high in terms of incident response plans in the room. So that's really great to see. It's not as common as you would think across, especially that SMB realm. So yeah, looks like we've got quite a few responses, about 70% participation. I'll give it one more minute, but it is a yes. No, you don't have an incident response plan. You're not really sure, and therefore maybe it's not tested, or maybe you'd like some help building or adapting one that you have, or you would like one in general. So I am going to end the poll, and I'll share the results out so everyone else can see. But this is quite high, actually. We've got quite a few yeses in the room, so that's actually pretty impressive. And if you're a no, I'm not sure, like some help, you're definitely in the majority on the majority who answer this poll. So great. Thank you everyone for participating. And Kyle, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. And I feel like every time we do this, the numbers go up and up, which is amazing. And I saw some commentary that we have a plan in place, but we need to do more testing, which steals a little of thunder, but that is a big piece to the plan. Having the plan is amazing. Testing the plan is sort of the next steps. We'll go into that a little bit later. Talking about disasters, unfortunately, they aren't predictable. But there are steps that you should take to prepare for it and help reduce your company's vulnerability. So two really important steps are preventing unnecessary risk and preparing for that which we can't predict or that we can't control. So we'll take a little bit deeper dive into each of these steps. So we'll start with the first one there, preventing unnecessary risk. So preventing this unnecessary risk might seem like a daunting task when we look at it from that high level view, but having a plan like this in place dramatically reduce the risk. And there's 5 steps that we've come up with. Encrypt data to hide it from prying eyes, educate your users, bring your own device security policies and ways to help protect mobile devices, implement strong user access control, and using an off-site backup for business recovery. So we'll dive into the first one here. So number 1, encrypt your data. So encryption is a process that takes your data, scrambles it into another form or code so that only people that have access to a password or a secret key can go ahead and decrypt it and read it. So the idea is if hackers do end up getting their hands on your data, they're unable to read it. This adds just an extra layer of security or helps lessen your vulnerability. You can encrypt multiple different types of data. Applications data can be encrypted. We talk about things like backup moving up. That's important to make sure that your backup data is stored encrypted. Email can be transferred encrypted, right? Network traffic, VPNs, things like that. So there's a whole lot of different forms that this comes in, but that's sort of a security industry standard way to make sure that data just can't be accessed plain text, and adds another layer of obfuscation to make sure that everything's protected. So no surprise that virus and malware threats keep getting worse. They keep getting more sophisticated. This is because the cyber criminals are becoming more sophisticated. They're becoming well-trained. They're well-funded. It's actually a full-time job. It's a business now. It's no longer just the keyboard kids, right, sitting at home and coming up with attacks. It's actually being funded. There's things like ransomware as a service where you can actually buy ransomware kits, and you can buy lists of potential I call them customers, potential victims, right? They look at them like customers, and it's really just become an industry on its own. The rise of AI, I guess, depending on what side you're on, has or has not helped that at all from their perspective. It used to be, right, these obvious email attacks with grammatical errors, and everyone's familiar with the Nigerian prince. Now we got AI writing, perfect English, and it makes these attacks much harder to catch. There's tools out there like CryptoLocker, which is ransomware, which is used to encrypt user file, hold it encrypted. Again, talking about encryption, right? They're scrambling the data. They're the ones that are holding the key. And if you pay them money, they'll sell you the key to access your own data, which is, again, in itself has become its own business through ransomware as a service. There's tools like anti-malware, there's antivirus software that can help keep you safe from cyber threats, but these tools only protect you against threats that have already been identified. So if there's, they're out there creating new variants of ransomware, new variants of malware that nobody's seen before, this is where it's crucial to have the users trained. So while we focus on putting the right teams in place, the right tools in place to prevent attacks, inevitably something will get through one of the security layers. So providing ongoing training and security awareness training to users is going to help change them from a weakness into a strength, and they kind of serve as your last line of defense, right? So again, from the scope of like email, stuff gets through, hits a user's inbox, made it through the security layers. We want them to be aware of what potential threats look like, so they're not interacting with these threats. They're not launching ransomware within the environment. So it really is important to keep your team educated on virus and malware prevention best practices. Number 3 was BYOD, bring your own device security policies. So as the workforce has just naturally shifted, and a lot of companies have either complete remote or hybrid policies, mobile devices have really become ubiquitous with the workplace, right? Everyone's checking email on their phone. I'm constantly checking Slack, and maybe logging into some different systems from my device, right? So this creates a challenge to go ahead and how do we keep the sensitive data secure when employees are using personal devices that are potentially unchecked or unapproved technology into the corporate network. A lot of companies, rather than prohibiting personal mobile devices outright, which is a ban that often goes, ignored as well by the users. But we want to work with you to implement effective BYOD security requirements. So this is going to go ahead and reduce the chances of compromising company data when mobile devices are lost or stolen or anything like that. So mobility management providers in the industry recommend the following considerations when devising a BYOD strategy. The first is, which mobile devices do we support? Is there a minimum operating system or patch that we require? Do we have a way to prevent jailbroken devices, right? So just a way to sort of control what can access the data. There's the need for relevant compliance requirements based on industry or based on jurisdiction. Questions come up: how do we parse personal information to prevent easy capture? So ways to sort of keep the corporate data streaming separate from personal data to make sure none of that gets intermingled. Data plan management, payment, tracking of the devices, right? Think things like mobile device management. There's tools out there for that. And then we need options for automated or self-service configuration. So an effective BYOD policy really provides security, but there needs to be flexibility, and it needs to be inclusive enough so that users aren't ignoring the security policies. There's that age-old concept of security versus convenience, right? IT always wants the most secure. which comes at the expense of convenience. Users want things to be convenient, which comes at the expense of security. So there really is a fine balance there of coming up with a plan and deciding what works for your business. Number 4, implement strong user access controls. So this is really, think of like permissions and entitlements to different data and applications and services that you use internally. So user education, BYOD policies are essential to fight off data loss threat, but they're most effective when they're complemented by strong user access control frameworks. So in most businesses, there's really just a small minimal number of employees that need unrestricted access to all of the company's sensitive data and applications. Think IT, right? Think admins. So therefore, businesses have to implement access controls to make sure that only employees that need access rights to do their job to those tools have access. So for example, right, we don't need sales accessing IT stuff on the back end, or accessing backups, or being able to make policy changes to firewalls. They don't need to do that to do their job. So if we can limit who can access what, it really reduces the threat that if somebody does become compromised by things like worms or ransomware or malware, or what we see more often is they become the victim of social engineering, so that users so that the bad guys trick the user into giving up credentials. If those credentials don't lead to any sophisticated tools that they don't need to, then it reduces the threat of intrusion. It reduces the threat that the attacker is going to get high-level access to all of your tools. So kind of breaking out roles and responsibility and user access based on need is a really important piece to keeping your environment secure. And then last, but certainly not least, using offsite cloud backup. So business recovery solution supported by data backup in the cloud is really a key to a quick recovery following any of those disasters that we looked at. Offsite kind of being the key word there. That ensures that critical business data is available even if a disaster destroys any local copies of the data, or takes out any of the local devices. There's that secondary copy of the data within the cloud. Unlike other data backup approaches, think of things like tape. Cloud backup can be automated. It doesn't need somebody to come in and check if the tape's full and swap out a physical piece of hardware. It just streams data to the cloud every night and makes sure that that's just a process that runs. Nobody needs to think about it. So this ensures consistent, reliable backups occur as often as you need them to. Cloud backup does need to be secure. It needs to be reliable. It needs to be efficient. So we see a lot of times there's military grade data encryption that helps keep your data safe while it's in transit up to the cloud. And it's also stored with that same military grade encryption at rest. So nobody's able to access the backup data and steal your data that way. Oftentimes there's redundant data centers that are available with these solutions to ensure that even if a backup in one location is compromised, or a data center loses network connectivity, or whatever the case, again, disaster, right, may be, that there's a copy of the data that's still available for restore at another location. And change block tracking technology built into these cloud backups really makes the nightly backup economical. So it's only updating portions of data of the most recently changed data. So it's really good and efficient at handling change and making sure it's only transferring data that it needs to. Cloud backup also enables a wider range of data protection. So there's things where it has the ability to replicate physical system images. If a hard drive blows up, we can restore that entire drive back to another device. If you guys use SQL as an example, it's a really common application. We can back up specifically SQL data. If you're using VMware Hyper-V virtual machines, there's some integrations into those different systems. So should a data loss threat come, then cloud backup ultimately helps you minimize the damage that it can do. Think ransomware as well, right? Somebody deploys ransomware by accident, encrypts all of the data. Having an off-site copy of that data allows you to easily roll back an environment as of some previous point in time. So there was a second point, which was preparing for the unavoidable. Before we jump into that, we just had one more poll. If you guys don't mind just taking a quick second, we'd really appreciate it.
Yes, definitely. This is actually round 2 of 3 polls, so there will be one more opportunity to get into a raffle for some swag after this. But, we've seen a lot today now from Kyle already in this presentation. After seeing everything today, how confident are you in your organization's ability to recover from a cyber attack? I'm going to launch the poll on the screen and just let us know your thoughts. Are you very confident? Are you somewhat confident? Not really confident? Or maybe you're not sure. You're sort of indifferent. um, Probably if you didn't have an instant response plan in case of a breach or an attack, you're probably going to be in the not confident, I would assume, or the I'm not sure. Maybe you're still somewhat confident, or maybe you're in an industry that you feel could handle some, quite a bit of downtime. I'm not sure what organization could, but it's possible. Looks like we've got, again, almost 70% participation. It looks like we've got the same crew answering. If anybody else wants to jump in, I'll give it another 20 seconds. We'll have a full minute to answer poll, and then I will put it to an end. All right. 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm sharing the results. So we've got some very confidence, somewhat confidence, a few not, and a few I'm not sure. So again, really good overall. We haven't seen this across a lot of the webinars. This is awesome to see that we have some more confident people here, which is great. So I will stop sharing and I will hand it back over to you, Kyle.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, we got a good group here today. Thanks, everyone, for taking the time. So just jumping back into it, some statistics here. We found out that 81% of companies don't test their recovery strategies. So we all know that things tend to work a lot better on paper than they ultimately do in practice unless they're tested and optimized regularly. So there's some questions to sort of prevent from becoming that 81%. Does your company have a DR plan? It seems like a lot of you do based on the previous poll questions. That's amazing. Do you know what that DR plan entails to execute? Is it time to set some test plans and stuff like that to iterate on it? This is all really a critical piece, and that's one that we're going to dive into a little bit further. So first, you need to start by actually defining what your disaster recovery plan is. So this really begins with honing in on what specifically you want to protect. In any type of disaster, there's really 4 elements that are at risk. No matter what the disaster is, there's potentially the people that can become compromised, or the people are at risk. There's the actual facility and building itself, equipment, whether that's on site or one of those BYOD devices, or people working remote. Equipment can become corrupted, stolen, you name it. And then the data is something that we need to make sure that we protect. So speaking of disasters, this just shows data specifically from 2023 in the US, which experienced 28 separate weather and climate disasters that cost at least $1 billion in damages or downtime. So that number puts 2023 into first place for the highest number of $1 billion disasters in a calendar year. Those included, things like a winter storm and a cold wave event that happened in Northeast US. There was a wildfire in Hawaii, if anyone remembers that. There was some droughts and heat wave events that affected central and southern US. There was some floods throughout California and Florida, a couple of tornadoes in central and eastern US, some tropical storms, and then there were 17 weather or hail events across many parts of the country. So each of these costing at least $1 billion worth of damages and downtime. So 2023 kind of being the top. This is a different map. This is from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which shows data from 1980 to 2023. And these are breaking it out into regions that have the largest impact from weather and climate disasters. So the darker the red, that means the more high risk that they face. So this is keeping in mind that we're measuring just natural disasters that cost at least $1 billion or more worth of damage. In addition to the highest number of billion-dollar disasters experienced, Texas also leads the U.S. in total cumulative costs, $402 billion worth of disasters since 1980. Florida is the second leading with $389 billion since then. And then Louisiana's total costs are $304. So just kind of what we showed a little bit earlier in the presentation on the data loss threat slide. Natural disasters are just one of the threats that your business faces, but one that certainly needs to be planned for and accounted for. So I think we have a pretty good understanding now of the landscape and why we need to plan ahead. So we'll talk a little bit about how we can prepare for the unexpected by using a well thought out and ideally regularly tested disaster recovery readiness plan. So there's some key factors that go into the plan. Speed. This is something, there's the concept of RTO or recovery time objective and RPO or recovery point objective that needs to be considered as part of the plan. So in other words, we need to think about how quickly do we need to get our data back and our systems back up and running, and how far back do we need to be able to go with that data to be able to restore from. We need to add some scope. So there's unique needs for different parts of different businesses. So different departments have different requirements when it comes to these restore points, restore times. For example, you'll definitely want to identify critical IT systems and networks and staff members that are responsible for each of these different departments. What authentication tools do you have? Passwords, MFA, that kind of stuff. Financial and legal information, insurance coverage to help recover from ransomware, for example. What processes do we want to follow to restore from? Backups, that kind of stuff. So having a clear idea of what data is mission critical and what needs to be up first is really a key to quickly recovering from a disaster. And then part of that plan will include time span. So we're not going to be able to recover everything at once. It's impossible to restore every system, every piece of data, every device at the same time. So that's where breaking this into short-term versus medium-term versus long-term recovery helps guide the users every step of the way in the event of some kind of disaster circumstance. And then along the same lines, granularity. So we want to think about recovery on multiple levels. There's application recovery, there's service recovery, there's entire site recovery. This is the detailed step-by-step process from the time that the initial event happens all the way through business continuity and you're full back up and running, just having those granular steps kind of broken out. And then testing. That's kind of the point where we're hoping to hammer home. It's not enough just to have a plan, but that plan needs to be tested. That plan needs to be improved based on the results of the tests. So DR plans really become an iterative process that they change as you add new systems, new processes, new people. The DR plan is going to change with it. So key people from each business unit really should be members of the team that's responsible for creating and testing the DR plan. Disaster recovery planning group needs to understand the business processes. So one member from each team sort of understands their own aspect of the business processes. What technology they use is an important network, systems, right? All of this needs to be considered in order to create that recovery plan. A risk and business impact analyst should be prepared by the disaster recovery planning group that includes at least the top 10 potential disasters. After analyzing the potential risks, priority levels need to be assigned to the business processes, to the applications, to the systems, to the data, right? Sort of breaking that out with priorities. And it's important to keep inventory up to date and have a complete list of the equipment, locations, vendors, and points of contact. So just all in all, have a general concept of what each department needs to recover, right? Sort of add that priorities for that short, medium, and long-term plan, so that when we need to execute this plan, we're focusing on the high priority stuff first. So the first step is to create that group, and this group, right, again, should ideally be comprised of representatives from different roles and different pieces of the organization so that we get that holistic overview and that no one segment is left unprotected or vulnerable. Secondly, it's important to conduct risk assessment. So go through each of the roles within the organization, assess impacts such as personal impact, such as loss of data, loss of productivity, so that you can determine which areas would have the greatest impact to the business if your company does fall victim to some sort of disaster, right? What's the most important pieces of the business to get back up and running? And then classify the data in apps. So again, right, different priority levels, such as things like mission critical all the way through non-critical type data. Having the assets prioritized ahead of time helps keep that focus. When the disaster strikes, it is pretty chaotic, right? Everyone needs to get everything back up and running as quickly as possible. So having things written down with priorities helps keep that rolled recovery approach in place and helps things go smoothly. Trying to do everything at once really just ultimately slows down the process. And every person, every piece of the business has would consider their stuff the most important. So it's really coming with that holistic view to make sure that as a company we have an idea of what do we need to get back up and running and start operating again. So another poll, please.
Okay, this is the last one, last chance. I'm going to launch it on the screen in just a second, but what is the biggest challenge your organization faces in implementing an effective disaster recovery plan? Now, there might be more than one of these for you, but if you could pick one of the options here, what's your biggest challenge? So lack of resources, budget constraints, is it maybe technical expertise? Is it buy-in from executives in the organization? Or maybe there's some other reason that's, maybe less common from the list above. So if you could pick one of these, which one would be your biggest? All right, got some good participation again. Thank you, everyone. We'll give it about 15 more seconds, so we give it the full minute for everyone to think about it, put their response in. Looks like we've got a really good mix. On the majority, it looks so far like budget, then technical expertise, then lack of resources, and executive buy-in and other are in the end there. So I'll just share the results and then I'll pass it back over to you, Kyle.
Awesome. Yeah, we do have a pretty good mix there. So, and that's kind of what I would expect as well. And some of these even overlap, or there's sometimes multiple in place. But yeah, that's something to keep in mind too, is where building these plans is keeping all that in mind. Cool. So there's the need for, really as part of the strategy, thinking about how will you recover. So we of course need to prepare that inventory and documentation of the plan, develop what we would consider verification criteria and procedures. So as we're going through testing, what's a success versus not a success, implement the plan, right? So actually perform the testing and identify critical personnel and recovery teams. So which critical business processes are dependent upon certain personnel that have unique knowledge, skills, or abilities within that area? How are they affected? There's just a lot of really questions to answer. And then step 5, ensure that you have a complete list of all your current inventory. So this allows you to have a full picture of what you have available and ultimately what needs to be protected. as an added layer to this is having that full picture of inventory that can help you categorize. So when we talk about putting things in priority buckets, if we don't have the full list of equipment, devices, people, apps that we're using, then something could fall through the cracks. So having that insight allows you to ultimately get the backup, to get back up and running quicker and to help you understand potential loss costs. And then really we want to, once we get the plan developed and created and we got the inventory and all of that set up and good to go, we need to take a step back. We need to assess how is this plan going to work. So it's one thing to have the plan on paper, but really it's important to take a step to review this plan in its entirety, making sure that it fulfills your business needs. So testing is that key element to ensure that things go smoothly when executing the plan. Practice, right? Just like anything else. We don't want the first time that we're going through this to be in an actual disaster environment. So if we can get some practice reps in, it really makes sure that when the time comes, people are familiar with expectations of their role and how things are going to go. So the last and final step is implementation. At this step, everyone should have clearly defined roles and responsibilities when executing the plan. Thorough testing should have been performed so that the plan can be updated and lessons would have been learned. And really, we ensure that the plan meets the expected results. Is this plan going to get us where we need to be? Should there be some sort of disaster that takes place? Implementing these best practices will help assist you if and when a disaster comes your way. It seems more when than if these days, but there is one example of a customer that we worked with, Eastern Yacht Club. Unfortunately for them, the disaster they experienced was a 3-alarm fire, and that happened just before their busy season. However, they had tested disaster recovery. They had their readiness plan in place. They were able to get their servers back up and running in under a day, and they were able to meet their next payroll. So oftentimes stories like these have a much different ending. But had these guys not been as prepared, they wouldn't have been up and running as quick. Was there one more poll, Kirsten?
Oh, I just realized we have one more poll. Let me just double check. You know what? We'll have to skip this one, Kyle. My apologies.
Yeah, no worries. So just to kind of summarize what we've covered today, make sure that you're backing up your data, that you know what data needs to be backed up, that you're incorporating this data into some sort of cloud backup, that you're choosing and partnering with the right tech companies to help help get you guys here, taking steps to prepare for disaster recovery, and most importantly, working with your service provider to test that DR plan.
Okay, and we're coming to an end. We do have a couple questions already in the Q&A. If you have any more, please enter them in. But some next steps. Today, you are invited by your managed service provider, your IT service provider. And so, contact them, reach out to them, and assess where your organization's vulnerabilities exist and develop or tweak your disaster recovery plan. Whether you feel you're in the top notch or you're in the bottom, I think either way, it's really important to keep looking at that recovery plan to make sure that it's evolving along with evolving cyber threats. So reach out to your MSP for that. And also create an ideal schedule for ongoing testing of your disaster recovery plan in case of a breach. It's super important to test it. You can build that plan. It can build some dust. And then in the moment when it happens, if your team isn't up to speed on it or it hasn't been tested in a while, it could end up causing some extra downtime that's not needed if you had some preparedness in place. So yeah. And then en route to you is a disaster recovery checklist that you can use, as well as a calculator on calculating the hidden costs of data loss. So those will be shared with you again by your IT service provider that invited you here today. And so you can help prepare with some of those tools. And then without further ado, we'll get into Q&A. So I'm just going to pop open the questions that we have so far. And again, feel free to keep adding them in there. We do have a little time left over. So feel free to ask away.
I
Kyle,
got a couple in there, yeah.
yeah. So what's a good spyware program to use, i.e. to scan my own PC?
So I think that is probably a great question for your service provider. Personally, we look more at Barracuda at the preventative side of things. So as a company, we have partnered with a product called Sentinel-1, which is really great at protecting endpoints and making sure that things like spyware and ransomware don't get deployed on any of the different endpoints.
Great, thank you. And then how does Barracuda's disaster recovery solution ensure data consistency and prevent data corruption during the recovery process? So this might differ across each managed service provider and how they leverage each of the solutions and what they build together. So, Kyle, if you could answer that to the best of your abilities, that'd be great.
Yeah, so relative to Barracuda specific solutions, we try to take preventative measures even prior to the recovery process. So our solutions themselves have been built and designed with ransomware in mind. So for example, our appliances are built on what we call a hardened Linux kernel. So it's not something that's susceptible to a lot of the Windows vulnerabilities that we see attackers trying to exploit. We obviously use the encryption so that the data itself is not susceptible. The backup data tends to be hidden on the network. So if somebody were to gain access to an endpoint, they're not able to browse to the data. And we do keep those redundant copies in the cloud. So all of that kind of follows through from backup and storage, which ultimately results in, safe data when we're going to perform the recovery.
Great, thank you, Kyle. Another one is how does cloud-based disaster recovery compare to traditional on-premise solutions in terms of reliability and cost effectiveness?
Yeah, so we talked about that a little bit. When I think of like backup from back in the day, it was really tape-based solutions. So it's everything streaming to a separate hard drive. That tape had a finite amount of data it could store on it, so somebody needed to be monitoring it regularly and making sure if that disk needed to be swapped, that it was swapped. So there was some manual process, some unreliability that goes into that, and then there's the cost of actually having to manage the hardware. So we replace that with the cloud. We don't need to worry about filling up storage, right? We just set a schedule. It's able to point to the data and it backs up on that recurring schedule. It's the cloud solutions that we offer have things like deduplication in place. So again, it's only transferring the unique blocks that have changed. So it's really efficient at handling change rates of the data, which ultimately, when we talk about costing, it's storing less with each backup, which results in some cost savings on the data that actually needs to be stored within the cloud.